capital increase and what it will do for the ADB in terms of trying to raise money for financing Africa's development in international markets? What difference will this capital increase make?
Well, ADB, as you know, is a AAA rated issuer in capital markets. The main impact of the capital increase will be to reinforce this AAA, which may mean lower cost of funds when the bank issues in capital markets.
Do you get a sense that your ability to borrow cheaper than perhaps than you're doing now will also, of course, extend into benefits for African countries? What difference will that make for Africa?
We do have a principle of cost pass-through, meaning that whatever cost of borrowings, we pass it through to our customer. So our customers are obviously interested in us borrowing at lower levels because it will benefit them immediately through the cost structure of our loans to the African customers of the bank.
But with the bigger size, does that in any way threaten the ability of the bank to maintain its AAA rating? Because, you know, obviously you'll have a larger loan book and therefore perhaps you may find yourself spreading yourself a little too thin, no?
We may have a larger loan book, but we will have a larger equity capital, an equity base of the bank. And the equity base of the bank is actually the core of the AAA of the bank.
How much more will you be able to borrow now that you've increased this capital base relative to what you were able to do in the past?
Well, on a yearly basis, we used to borrow around $2 to $3 billion, except during the crisis period where we borrowed up to $10 billion in 2009. The sustainable level of borrowing will increase from the historic $2 to $3 billion to around $5 to $6 billion per year.
So quite a big difference that will make.
It will.
Let's talk about the work that you're doing around developing Africa's financial markets. Now, you today are going to launch a fund for developing African bond markets. Just explain to us what exactly you're doing today and what difference that will make.
Well, we've observed that Africa was lagging behind in terms of developing domestic capital markets. And the way we wanted to address this issue was to offer a bond. The idea of this bond is to facilitate investment in issues by African countries and African corporates so that we deepen the liquidity of the African domestic markets across the continent.
Okay. So where will you be working and which countries are you targeting on that front?
Well, we have to target countries who have developed somehow their domestic markets, and countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Morocco, Egypt, and to a lesser extent Kenya, for example, who have already developed domestic markets. Those countries will be the prior targets, but there are other countries who are very keen in embarking in these projects because they have an interest in developing their own domestic markets, everywhere.
Sure, but how big is this fund?
The amount has not been decided yet. It's really a question of appetite of the central banks, the governments, and the corporates who are interested in the initiative.
But now we know that African bond markets are largely undeveloped. I mean, you mentioned the fact that there are a few that are already developed. What about those countries where there is nothing at the moment? Is the ADB engaged in any way to try and get those countries to develop these markets? Because, as we all know, without strong financial markets, really development is far more difficult.
We are active, intellectually speaking, meaning providing some technical knowledge and technical assistance to those countries. We are not yet at the stage where we will provide a concrete answer to the development of their own domestic capital markets.
Sure. Let's now finally speak about one of your pet subjects, the issue of local currency bonds. You have worked in South Africa, you have worked in Nigeria, you've worked in Tanzania. Are there other countries that you are hoping you'll be able to introduce a similar concept?
Well, one day we hope to do that in the 53 African countries.
When will that be?
Let's say 2020. No, really, I don't know. But the principle of that is that we do indeed want to support that African countries are able to develop their domestic markets whenever, however, it has to be done because they need it for the development of their economies.
Sure. Which countries are you working on specifically now?
Well, we are still working on issues in Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Zambia, just to give an example of some of those countries. I shouldn't forget Egypt, where we are actively talking on some issues there.
Thierry de Longuemar, Vice President Finance, African Development Bank. Thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.